The photograph is ordinary at first glance, a sepia-toned image labeled Cologne Cathedral, the 1860s. The stone facade rises impossibly clean, every Gothic filigree intact. There are no cranes, no scaffolds, no workshops, no workers frozen mid-task, just an empty square and a completed structure that official history claims required 6 centuries to build. The archive card notes a population census taken the same decade. Cologne lists fewer than 150,000 residents, artisans, laborers, stonecutters included. The numbers strain quietly under the weight of the architecture they are meant to explain. Stone blocks weighing dozens of tons, precision carvings repeated thousands of times, vaulting accuracy that modern laser surveys still struggle to improve. The square is silent. The photograph grain is thick. The absence feels deliberate. If this was a construction site, where is the construction? If it was not being built, what exactly were these people inheriting? The textbook narrative is calm, reassuring, and familiar. European cathedrals, we're told, were born of faith, patience, and incremental progress. Cologne Cathedral, Notre Dame, Milan, projects that were begun in the medieval period, halted by wars and plagues, then resumed centuries later with improved tools and renewed devotion. By the 19th century, restoration fever swept Europe. Nations reclaimed their spiritual monuments as symbols of identity. Archives describe completion, restoration, revival. Photographs from the 1850s and the 1860s appear to support this. Finished facades stand proudly in modernizing cities. Yet the documents never linger on how the work resumed so seamlessly. A Prussian construction ledger from the 1840s simply notes, work continues according to original plan. No explanation of tool transfer, no mention of prototype testing, no apprenticeship records linking medieval masons to 19th century restorers. At first glance, it feels reasonable. The Victorian era was an age of industrial advancement. Steam power, railway networks, gas lighting transformed cities overnight. Why not cathedral restoration? But reasonable stories often depend on what they choose not to show. The ledgers record expenditures but not methods. The photographs capture completion but not construction. The official timeline assumes continuity where evidence suggests rupture. Restoration explains appearance but not origin. The buildings stand finished, their creators unnamed, their construction methods unrecorded. We inherit monuments and call it progress. Why do completed cathedrals appear before the tools used to build them? Census books from mid-19th century Europe are meticulous. Columns of births, trades, deaths, migrations. In Cologne, Strasbourg, Vienna, Milan, the data stabilizes after the Napoleonic Wars. Bureaucrats count every baker, blacksmith, and barrel maker. Stonemasons are listed, but not in numbers remotely proportional to the labor required. An 1855 Cologne census lists fewer than 400 registered masons in the city and surrounding districts. Apprentices are included. This in a city supposedly completing a cathedral that had consumed generations of medieval labor. Meanwhile, architectural drawings preserved in cathedral archives show tolerances tighter than 1 millimeter across vast spans. Modern restorers quietly admit these tolerances are surprisingly advanced. Some admit they cannot replicate the precision with contemporary tools. The math refuses cooperation. 400 masons working with rope and chisel are credited with completing structures that required millions of precisely carved stones. The timeline compresses impossibly. The population shrinks beneath the achievement attributed to it. The documents never accuse, they simply sit side by side. Census records in one folder, architectural surveys in another, paper texture brittle, ink faded, silence intact. In Paris, similar patterns emerge. The 1856 census records the city's population at just over 1 million. Yet photographs from the same year show miles of uniform Haussmannian boulevards, completed seemingly overnight. Official records credit Baron Haussmann with reorganizing the city between 1853 and 1870, 17 years, to rebuild an entire urban center while maintaining normal civic function. The labor isn't there, the time isn't there, but the buildings are. Records explain populations, not capabilities. What happens when the math refuses to cooperate? Official explanations lean on continuity, that techniques were passed down, that medieval guild knowledge survived intact across centuries of upheaval. But guild records tell a different story. Many were dissolved during the Reformation, others vanished during the 30 Years' War when German states lost up to half their population. Apprenticeship lines break abruptly in the 17th century, then reappear fully formed in the 19th, without transitional documentation. An 1821 Bavarian guild charter simply states that methods were restored to former standard. Former standard, but restored from where? The charter provides no lineage, no master craftsman genealogies, no documented transmission of knowledge across the dark centuries. Consider the timeline. The 30 Years' War ends in 1648. Cathedral construction resumes in earnest around 1820. 170 years of silence. Then suddenly, techniques reappear that modern engineers struggle to replicate. The narrative asks us to imagine an unbroken chain with missing links, oral tradition, perhaps. Secret societies preserving ancient wisdom. Freemasonic lodges guarding construction secrets through plague and conflict. And we usually oblige. The alternative, that the knowledge was not preserved but inherited from structures already standing, feels too destabilizing to consider. Yet the photographs persist: clean facades, empty plazas, no evidence of the incremental struggle the official story requires. In Vienna, the Hofburg Palace expands throughout the 19th century in perfect stylistic harmony with sections supposedly built centuries earlier. The stonework matches seamlessly. The architectural grammar remains consistent. Either the builders possessed extraordinary historical sensitivity, or they were working from a template already present. Continuity is assumed, not demonstrated. Who preserves knowledge during centuries of collapse? Early photographs should show chaos. Construction sites, stone debris, temporary scaffolds, the residue of ambitious public works. Instead, we find stillness. A photograph taken in 1867 of Milan Cathedral shows the plaza swept clean. The facade fully articulated, every pinnacle in place. No crane shadows, no lifting rigs, no wooden frameworks, just the completed structure rising against an empty sky. Photographic exposure times in the 1860s required several seconds of stillness. Moving objects blur. Workers in the middle of a task would appear as ghosts. Yet exposure time explanations fail when the pattern repeats across dozens of cities, continents apart. Paris, Cologne, Vienna, Prague, St. Petersburg, Washington. Different photographers, different decades, same emptiness. Photographs from the 1850s of Paris show entire boulevards completed, miles of identical stone facades, uniform windows, matching ironwork balconies. Official records claim Baron Haussmann employed thousands of workers simultaneously, yet none appear in the photographic record. In 1858, a photographer named Charles Marville documented the demolition of old Paris and the construction of the new. His images should capture transition. Instead, they show completed streets awaiting inhabitants. The before images reveal medieval chaos. The after images show geometric perfection. The during images, the actual construction, are conspicuously absent. If these were active sites, someone should have been caught in the frame. They never are. Across the Atlantic, the same pattern emerges. Photographs of Washington, D.C. from the 1860s show the Capitol building complete, its dome finished despite the Civil War consuming national resources. The city appears pristine. No construction debris, no worker camps, no supply depots. The buildings simply are. They exist in a state of completion that defies the timeline, attributing their construction to the very populations photographed beside them. Absence becomes conspicuous through repetition. What kind of construction leaves no trace of itself? Industrial archaeology offers an uncomfortable admission. The machines required to lift, cut, and place stones of this size with this precision do not appear in patent records until after the buildings were already standing. Steam cranes capable of lifting multi-ton stone blocks enter documented use in the 1870s and the 1880s. By then, cathedrals across Europe are already complete. The Great Pyramid of Giza weighs approximately 6 million tons. Yet the first steam-powered excavator capable of moving similar loads is not patented until 1882. Stone-cutting machines capable of producing uniform Gothic tracery are patented in the 1870s. Circular saws with diamond-tipped blades appear in the early 20th century, yet the stone already matches those outputs centuries earlier. Modern cathedral restorers work with laser measurement systems and computer-aided design. They use diamond wire saws and hydraulic lifts. Despite these advantages, they describe medieval achievements as surprisingly advanced and difficult to replicate. In 2019, restoration work on Notre Dame revealed construction techniques that baffled engineers. The timber roof framework employed joinery methods requiring precision measurement tools that did not officially exist in the 13th century. The stone vaulting achieved weight distribution that modern software struggles to model. The official explanation invokes human ingenuity. Medieval builders, we are told, possessed intuitive understanding of physics and material properties. They worked through trial and error, refining techniques across generations. But trial and error leaves evident. Failed experiments, collapsed structures, imperfect earlier attempts. The archaeological record should be littered with progressively improving prototypes. It is not. The cathedrals appear fully realized. The techniques arrive complete. Their predecessors had rope, chisels, and manpower, at least officially. The tool gap suggests an alternative reading, not that ancient builders were impossibly skilled, but that the tools were lost, not invented. That 19th century industry was recovering capabilities, not pioneering them. Technology appears after the achievement it explains. What if the tools were lost, not invented? By 1851, Europe begins hosting world fairs. Temporary cities of iron, glass, and ornament rise in months. The Crystal Palace in London, designed by Joseph Paxton and completed in 9 months, spans over 990,000 square feet, nearly 300,000 panes of glass. Iron framework precise to the millimeter. The official narrative credits Industrial Revolution efficiency, prefabrication, mass production, the dawn of modernity. Then comes the 1893 Chicago World's Fair. The Columbian Exposition spans 600 acres, over 200 buildings in Beaux-Arts style, massive neoclassical structures with columns, domes, statuary. Officially, they are temporary plaster, called the White City, built to be demolished after the fair closes. Photographs suggest otherwise: thick walls, stone detailing, massive foundations. The buildings possess weight. The Court of Honor features a central basin with fountains, surrounded by exhibition halls that rival European palaces in scale. The construction timeline was 2 years. For context, the Washington Monument, a simple stone obelisk, took 36 years to complete. The official explanation claims these were star facades, plaster over wooden frames. But photographs show structural depth, window recesses, column shadows suggesting three-dimensional mass, and the demolition photos show rubble volumes inconsistent with temporary construction. Contemporary observers noted the strangeness. An 1894 article in Engineering magazine remarked that the rapidity with which the buildings arose was without precedent in construction history. By 1900, the Exposition Universelle in Paris exhibits similar impossible speed. The Grand Palais, the Petit Palais, the Pont Alexandre III, all completed in under 3 years. Structures that today would require a decade of planning alone. When cities can appear in a year, questions about cathedrals sharpen. If temporary exhibition halls can rise in months with steel and plaster, how did permanent stone monuments appear across continents using pre-industrial tools? The fairs reveal capacity, but they also reveal pattern. The same architectural vocabulary, the same construction speed, the same conspicuous absence of process documentation. Speed exposes scale. Were these truly built or simply uncovered? Census margins begin whispering. In London, New York, Paris, orphan numbers surge in the mid-19th century, not gradually, abruptly. The New York Foundling Hospital, established in 1869, records 11,000 children in its first 3 years. Intake forms repeat the same notation: origin unknown, parents deceased. They do not say mother died in childbirth or father killed in accident. They record simply unknown. Orphan train programs begin in 1854. Between 1854 and 1929, an estimated 250,000 children are transported from East Coast cities to the Midwest and beyond. Official narrative frames this as charitable relocation, urban overcrowding solved by rural adoption. Orphan. But the numbers resist that explanation. Foundling hospital records show intake exceeding plausible birth rates. An 1872 report from the New York Foundling Hospital notes that many children arrived without any documentation, no birth records, no parental information, just children appearing in sufficient numbers to require systematic redistribution. Across Europe, the pattern repeats. London's Foundling Hospital, Paris's Hospice des Enfants Trouvé, and Moscow's Imperial Foundling Home all report massive intake increases in the mid-19th century. The explanations vary: industrialization, urban migration, poverty, but the synchronicity is striking. In Australia, the records grow stranger still. Aboriginal children taken from families in the late 19th century are described in official documents as orphans, despite having living parents. The terminology suggests a definition of orphan that extends beyond parental death. Who were these children? The official answer, victims of urbanization and poverty, explains local phenomena but not continental synchronicity. It does not explain why orphan systems expanded simultaneously across disconnected nations, why the numbers spike so dramatically in a single generation. The records offer no genealogies, no family trees extending backward, just intake dates and destination towns. Immigration records do not match. Birth rates do not support the numbers. The children appear as demographic facts without demographic origins. Demographics do not just shift, they reset. Who populates a world after something ends? Cathedrals, capitals, asylums, train stations. The same architectural grammar appears simultaneously across Europe, North America, and Russia. Consider the symmetry. Gothic revival architecture emerges as a movement in the 1840s, yet the buildings it revives employ structural techniques that medieval records never fully documented. Pointed arches, flying buttresses, ribbed vaulting. These elements appear in buildings separated by thousands of miles, constructed within decades of each other. The Capitol building in Washington, the Houses of Parliament in London, St. Isaac's Cathedral in St. Petersburg, the Palacio de Bellas Artes in Mexico City. Different nations, different resources, same proportions. The vaulting ratios match. Column spacing follows identical mathematical relationships. Ornamental programs employ the same symbolic vocabulary even when cultural contexts diverge. This is not the gradual diffusion of architectural ideas. Diffusion leaves traces, earlier versions and regional variations, misunderstandings translated into local material. Instead, the buildings arrive grammatically complete. They speak a common language with native fluency across cultures that had minimal architectural exchange. Maps of the 1850s show railway networks spreading across continents, new cities appearing along the lines. Wherever the railways reach, the identical buildings appear. Train stations in Moscow and Paris employ the same design logic. Government buildings in Buenos Aires mirror those in Vienna. Architectural historians call this Victorian eclecticism or Beaux-Arts classicism. They trace influences through published pattern books and traveling architects. The diffusion model. But diffusion requires time. It requires gradual adoption and local adaptation. What we see is synchronicity, the same fenestration patterns, the same dome geometries, the same relationship between building mass and ornamentation. In 1889, the Eiffel Tower rises in Paris, a radical departure from classical forms. Within years, similar iron structures appear in cities worldwide. The explanation is technological exchange through expositions and publications. Yet cathedrals and capitals show the same synchronicity centuries before mass media. Independent genius rarely synchronizes this cleanly. What if the blueprint was already there? Consider the anomalies together. Buildings requiring advanced tools appear before those tools exist. Cities emerge faster than labor populations allow. Children appear without genealogies. Records restart mid-sentence. The pattern suggests a rupture, a civilizational discontinuity that official narratives smooth into progress. What if the 19th century was not a continuation but a restart? The hypothesis troubles every assumption. It positions the Victorian era not as an age of construction, but of occupation. Not innovation, but recovery. Not building, but inheriting. The infrastructure already existed. The architectural knowledge was embedded in structures, not transmitted through unbroken apprenticeship chains. The population that appeared in census records arrived to inhabit, not to construct. This reframes every anomaly. The empty photographs become evidence of discovery, not construction. The tool gap becomes a recovery period. The orphan surge becomes a repopulation event. The timeline shifts. Official history claims gradual urban growth through the 19th century, industrialization drawing rural populations to cities. But photographs show completed urban infrastructure before significant population arrival. Paris rebuilds before it is fully populated. Washington, D.C. has monuments before it has neighborhoods. The sequence reverses, first the buildings, then the people. Records support this reading when examined for what they do not say. Census data from the 1850s shows sudden population increases without corresponding immigration documentation. Passenger ship manifests do not account for the numbers. Birth rates do not support the growth, yet the people appear. They occupy the buildings, they staff the institutions, they generate the bureaucratic records that become official history, and they claim continuity. Family genealogies are written backward, extending into periods where records are conveniently absent. Institutional histories credit founding moments that align with the building's appearance, not their construction. The narrative shifts from construction to occupation, from progress to recovery, from innovation to inheritance. If the 19th century inherited its infrastructure, then every foundation myth requires reconsideration. National identities built on construction narratives collapse. Progress myths thin. History may record stewardship, not creation. What if we were repopulated? Maps before 1800 label vast regions as Tartaria. Not a single unified empire, but a designation spanning Central Asia, Siberia, parts of Eastern Europe. Cartographers from different nations agree on the label despite little agreement on political boundaries. Then from 1800 to 1850, the label vanishes. In its place, nation-states, borders, census systems. The Russian Empire expands eastward. New countries appear with complete administrative systems. The land is divided, named, governed. But the architectural remnants remain. In Kazan, the Kul Sharif Mosque and the Annunciation Cathedral share the same plaza, structures employing similar construction techniques despite representing different religions. In Siberian cities, massive administrative buildings and cathedrals predate the official founding dates of the cities themselves. The official explanation frames Tartaria as a vague European designation for regions they did not fully understand, a map placeholder for terra incognita. As exploration and colonization progressed, the label was replaced with accurate political geography. Yet, the architectural evidence suggests Tartaria was not unknown. It was inhabited. The buildings demonstrate sophisticated engineering. The city planning shows geometric precision. These are not primitive settlements gradually developed by colonial powers. They are completed urban centers that colonial powers occupied and renamed. 19th century travelers to these regions note the strangeness. An 1820 Russian military report describes finding substantial stone structures of unknown origin in newly claimed Siberian territories. The buildings are incorporated into Russian administration without explanation of who built them. The pattern extends beyond Asia. In North America, photographs from the 1860s show San Francisco with monumental stone buildings supposedly erected during the Gold Rush, a period of rapid population influx and resource extraction. But the buildings suggest permanence that contradicts frontier narratives. Perhaps Tartaria was not a country, perhaps it was a world, a civilization whose administrative label vanished from maps, while its physical infrastructure was rebranded as the achievement of successor states. Names vanish faster than stones. Who benefits when a civilization becomes a rumor? No single authority admits rupture. Churches inherit cathedrals, governments inherit capitals, universities inherit observatories. Everyone claims stewardship, no one claims authorship. The word inheritance matters here. The Vatican archives contain records of cathedral dedications, not construction documentation. Bishops consecrate buildings whose construction history remains vague. The ceremonies mark possession, not completion. This is about possession. Government archives follow the same pattern. Foundation stones are laid for buildings that already stand. Dedication plaques credit contemporary leaders for completing or restoring structures whose origins remain unspecified. The emphasis is on completion. In Washington, D.C., the Capitol cornerstone was laid in 1793 by George Washington. Photographs from the 1860s show architectural elements inconsistent with continuous construction. The building appears to have been completed, then symbolically refounded. University records demonstrate similar discontinuity. Oxford and Cambridge claim medieval origins, yet their oldest surviving buildings employ construction techniques that architectural historians struggle to date precisely. The institutions claim continuity, but the physical evidence suggests inheritance. The claim of continuity is contested. The pattern extends to infrastructure. Railway systems in the mid-19th century expand with remarkable speed, but many routes follow existing earthwork grades. The official narrative credits engineering innovation. The geography suggests railways were laid on prepared ground. Think of this as infrastructure inherited rather than invented. Silence becomes policy. Asking about origins is redirected to foundation myths. Institutional legitimacy depends on continuity narratives. To admit inheritance is to question ownership. The force of silence is intentional. Museum collections follow the same logic. Artifacts are displayed with acquisition dates, not origin dates. The British Museum catalogues when objects entered the collection, not when they were created. The distinction is preserved carefully. The record is about acquisition. In Russia, the Hermitage contains vast collections acquired during the 19th century, paintings, sculptures, architectural elements. The acquisition records are meticulous, the provenance records are incomplete. Provenance is often missing. Across institutions, the pattern holds. Possession is documented, creation is assumed. Possession is recorded more reliably than origin. Libraries maintain archives that begin abruptly in the early 19th century. Earlier records are described as lost to fire or destroyed during conflict. The gaps are normalized, gaps in the record are accepted. Ownership does not imply origin. What history requires silence to survive? If populations were reset, genealogy fractures. The comfortable assurance of lineage that every person descends from documented ancestors becomes uncertain. This is a question of genealogy. Family trees researched through genealogical records typically terminate in the early 1800s. Beyond that point, documentation grows sparse. Parish records burn, immigration manifests go missing, the trail ends. Professional genealogists acknowledge this as a common research barrier. The explanation cites poor record keeping, institutional disorganization, fire damage. But the pattern is universal. Across nations and record-keeping systems, the same temporal boundary appears. This barrier is real. Surnames provide additional strangeness. Many common family names appear fully formed in the 19th century without clear etymological origins. Official explanations cite occupational names, geographic markers, patronymic traditions. The actual distribution does not match these patterns. Consider the oddity of surnames. In the United States, Ellis Island immigration records begin in 1892. Before that, passenger manifests are incomplete. Millions of people claim American ancestry extending before Ellis Island, but documentation is fragmentary. Ellis Island marks a change in record keeping. The same pattern appears in census records worldwide. The 1850s mark a threshold. Earlier records exist but are incomplete, disorganized, inconsistent. Later records are comprehensive, systematic, bureaucratic. The census becomes modern and centralized. It is as if recording systems were established simultaneously across disconnected nations. The appearance of simultaneity raises difficult questions, as if populations needed to be counted, categorized, and documented all at once. The implications are personally destabilizing. Identity depends on continuity. What if that lineage is a construction? What if family histories were written backward to fill gaps in memory and documentation? The orphan trains take on new significance. 250,000 children redistributed across the continent, given new names, new families, new origins. Within 2 generations, their descendants would have family trees extending into the era of discontinuity. An inherited world requires inherited people, not descended from continuous lineage, but placed into a world already built, assigned genealogies that provide the illusion of continuity. Consider the idea of inheritance. Who were your ancestors, really? To accept this possibility costs comfort. The world becomes unfamiliar. Progress myths dissolve. Institutional legitimacy trembles. History textbooks become suspect. Foundation narratives, the stories nations tell themselves about their origins, require re-examination. Every statue commemorating a builder might commemorate an inheritor, this is a call for re-examination. The implications extend beyond academic revision. They touch personal identity, national belonging, civilizational purpose. If we inherited this world rather than built it, what does that mean for human achievement, for the narrative of progress that structures modern self-understanding? The cognitive dissonance is severe. We stand inside cathedrals and government buildings that official history attributes to our ancestors. We trust those attributions because they support comfortable continuity. To question them is to question inheritance itself. Yet the photographs remain silent, empty, complete. The census records sit in archives, their numbers straining under the weight of monuments they supposedly explain. The tool gap persists, medieval achievements that seem to require modern technology. The orphan records accumulate, children without origins appearing in numbers that defy demographic logic. This is the accumulating evidence. Every anomaly can be dismissed individually. Exposure times explain empty photographs. Immigration explains population growth. Restored techniques explain architectural continuity. But together, the anomalies whisper a different story. They suggest rupture, not continuity. They point toward inheritance, not construction. They reveal synchronicity that defies gradual diffusion models of official history. The alternative narrative does not offer comfort. It offers pattern recognition. The coherence of accumulated evidence stands against fragmented official explanations, and it leaves questions. If we inherited this architecture, who built it? If the 19th century was a restart, what ended? If populations were placed rather than descended, where did they come from? The official story survives because it requires less revision, because it maintains institutional legitimacy and personal identity, because questioning it demands we reconsider everything we assume about civilization and progress. Truth is not loud, it accumulates. What else are we standing inside without realizing? Truth accumulates quietly until patterns emerge. Return to the first photograph, the one labeled Cologne Cathedral from the 1860s. The stone facade still rises, impossibly clean. The square remains empty. What has changed is the viewer. The absence is no longer empty, it is occupied by questions. The silence of the plaza becomes evidence. The grain of the photograph becomes testimony. The census records still note fewer than 150,000 residents. Labor calculations still refuse to cooperate. The tools still appear after the buildings they supposedly constructed. Official history calls it restoration, calls it completion, calls it the triumph of faith and patience, but the pattern suggests otherwise. The synchronicity across continents, the demographic impossibilities, the architectural inheritance appears before the populations meant to have built it. The cathedral stands unchanged. Its stones carry no signatures. Its construction history remains vague. Its completion date marks occupation, not creation. If this was not built for them, who was it built for? And what happened to them? The photograph offers no answers, only the stillness of a completed world awaiting its inheritors. An empty plaza where workers should have been. A finished structure that official timelines cannot adequately explain. The anomalies remain. The questions accumulate. The alternative interpretation persists alongside the official narrative, each competing to explain the same evidence, the same stones, the same silence. The viewer must decide which story better fits the pattern, which explanation accounts for the synchronized appearance of identical architectural grammar across disconnected continents, which narrative makes sense of children without origins, cities without builders, techniques without documented transmission. The photograph still hangs in the city archive. The cathedral still stands in the plaza. The census still records impossible numbers. The absence remains, but now it speaks.